Hello again and welcome back to our course on Excel 2019 Advanced. In this section, we're going to start to look at date and time functions in Excel 2019. Now, of course, the use of dates and times is fundamental in Excel, but for many people, there are aspects of dates and times that are baffling, confusing, and can cause all sorts of problems. So what I'm going to do in this section is explain in detail how dates and times work, and then look at some of the main functions you're going to need to be familiar with in order to handle any kind of Excel application that requires the use of dates and times. Now, before we begin, let's start with one of the things that I think is the root of many people's problems with dates and times. And that is, ideally you will have the date and time settings on your device set correctly before you even begin. Now, I don't mean by that you have the correct date and time set, but I mean that you have the format set. Although there are some minor differences in how these default settings are handled in the versions of Windows that Excel 2019 will run, fundamentally the approach is the same. You need to start by going to Control Panel and clicking on Region. And you'll get this little dialog box. As I said before, my default language is set to English United States. And in this drop-down, my selection Match Windows Display Language means that my regional settings generally will match English United States. In the drop-down where I could choose a different language to determine the settings, for example, let's scroll down and select English United Kingdom, my short date format will be day, month, year. Whereas if I say, and let's go back to our drop down and scroll back up to the top, Match Windows Display Language, it is of course month, day, year. Now you are probably familiar with what these little D's and big M's mean, but I'll come back to those in a moment. The important thing to realize is that these are my default settings. And if I don't change anything else, if I just insert dates, this determines how they will appear. The same is true of time as well. Now, it may be that in a particular workbook or even a particular cell, I need some different settings, and I'm sure you already know how to change the time or the date format in a cell. But if you find that you're always having to change the short date format and you think, why can't this be the way I want it to be, you almost certainly need to change it in your default settings. Changing the short date format is easy. You can click the drop down and select a short date format. And the same can be done for long date. So there are my defaults. And very importantly, down here we have some additional settings. And these give us settings for time and date. Now, starting with the date ones, there's an example short date and long date. And those are my date formats. Not only can I choose these standard defaults, but I can click in here like so, and edit this if I want to any combination of the appropriate symbols. And you will see immediately below that there is an explanation of what the notation means. So D or DD is the day number, DDD or DDDD is the day of the week, M is the month, Y is the year, single M will give you a numeric month, long string of M's will give you the words for the month. Also under there is a standard cutoff year, which determines which century is assumed if you enter a 2-digit year. So if I set a year number of 67, it will assume that it's 1967. Now again, you can change that cutoff year if you want to, and you can also change the first day of the week, which I currently have set to Sunday. Note the reset button in the bottom right-hand corner. Now you have a similar set of options for time and an explanation of what those abbreviation symbols mean. Now, the first thing you need to do before you start dealing with dates and times is to make sure that you know how these are set and that you are happy with how they're set. And the second thing is that when you are working in Excel, if you're annoyed with the fact that you don't get the right defaults, this is the starting point for setting those defaults. Now, following on from that explanation, you might want to take a look at the help page, either from within Excel 2019, I've brought it up in the side pane just here, or on office.com. And I searched for format a date the way you want. This basically explains how to set date formats, how to set custom date formats, and so on. I'm not covering these formats on this course because I'm assuming you're already fairly familiar with these, but if you do have any uncertainty, then this is a good page to look at. So let's start doing some things with dates and times. Let's put a date in cell F5, and I'm going to put 6/11/78 and hit enter. So that's June the 11th, 1978. Note that because I only entered the 2-digit year, it became 1978 because of that cutoff earlier on. Let's go back into that cell now and change the cell format. So right-click, Format Cells, and I'm going to change it to number format with no decimal places, and click OK. So it now becomes a number 28652. Now, this is something that tends to confuse people. A date in Excel 2019, when formatted as numbers, is the number of days since the 1st of the 1st, 1900. Now, when you look at a date on an Excel worksheet, what you're looking at is a representation of a whole number. In fact, times are stored as fractions of a day, so midday on that date would be 28652.5. 6 a.m. would be 28652.25, so on and so forth. One of the things that Excel is pretty good at is recognizing dates and times. If I start with a new cell, so H6, and I'm just going to check the formatting on that cell by going to Format Cells, and I can see that has general formatting applied, so no specific format. So let's put in here 10 org and hit enter. You can see that Excel has looked at that and decided it's probably a date. So it's changed the format of the cell, and we can just double check that. So right click and Format Cells. And you can see here it's selected custom with this format just here, D-MMM. Now if I change this back to general format and click on OK, I can see that Excel has correctly stored that as a date. And that's the number of days in question since the 1st of January 1900. But what about dates and times? Let's put in a time into cell H8 of 10:30, and we'll say AM, and hit enter. Let's check the formatting on that cell. And I can see it's selected custom, and it's selected hours, minutes with that AM, PM marker. But what about if we want to put those two things together? So in cell H10, I'm going to combine the two. So let's say 10 org and enter. Again, Excel has realized it's a date and time. And if I change it to number format, and let's give this quite a few decimal places, and click OK, you can see that it's displaying it as a fraction of a day. However, if I try and put that in a sentence, and hit enter, then Excel will not recognize a date or time combination as part of a sentence. So it's important to understand how dates and times are stored in Excel 2019. And it's also important to understand that Excel will do quite a lot of work in recognizing dates and times, but that the formatting, apart from the default formatting that Excel will use, is largely down to you. And it's important to understand how to use those formatting codes to get dates and times to display the way you want them to. It's also important to understand the various different functions that you can use with dates and times. For instance, you might want to use a function that will tell you a date 60 days from today. Or maybe you want to find a function that will tell you what the time was 2.5 hours ago. These are the types of time and date functions that we're going to be looking at in the next section, so please join me for that.